Hi, I'm Wendi from Shiny Happy World, and today I'm going to show you how to make a quarter square triangle. Now I'm assuming that you already know how to make a half square triangle. That's a slightly easier triangle to make, and I've already done a video showing how to do that. So if you haven't already watched that, or if you don't know how to make a half square triangle, go watch that video now. If you have watched it, or if you know how to make a half square triangle, now we're going to move one step up to quarter square triangles. So if you'll remember, when we make a half square triangle, and just a quick reminder, the half square triangles, the straight grain is on the outside edges of those squares. So the bias is on the hypotenuse of the triangle. That's the longest side. So when we made the half square triangles, just a quick reminder, you cut your squares to start with 1 inch larger than the finished square that you wanted to make. When you're making quarter square triangles, you're going to cut that starter square 1.5 inches bigger than what the final finished square is going to be. So for these, I wanted to have 8-inch square finished blocks. So I cut the fabric to start with 9.5 inches square. So I took my 9.5 inches square and I made 2 half square triangle blocks. Remember the process that I use. When you finish it, you have 2 half square triangle blocks. Those are your starting blocks for making quarter square triangle blocks. And remember, on a quarter square triangle, the hypotenuse, or the longest side of the triangle, is what's going to end up on the outside of the square, and that's going to be the straight grain. So you can either, if you want to make a block that has 4 quarter square triangles in it, you take the 2 half square triangles and you put them together so that the sides, the same color, is opposite each other. So I'm going to put the dark blue triangle on this side and then on this side. You line them up so that the seam is butted up against it itself. You always fold your seam allowance toward the darker color, and that way when you put them together, they'll nest together and you can actually feel that bumping up against itself, bumping up against the seam on the lower block. And that'll help keep everything together. Then what you're going to do is draw a line down the middle, just like making a half square triangle, and you're going to sew 1/4 inch on each side of the line. Cut it apart, and you have your finished quarter square triangle blocks. So it's really making another set of half square triangle blocks out of half square triangle blocks. But I'm going to show you something a little bit different. I'm going to show you the same exact process, but instead of using 2 half square triangle units, I'm going to use one that is a solid block. And what I'm going to end up with is a block that has a solid triangle on one side, and then a half square triangle on one side, and 2 quarter square triangles on the other side of the diagonal. So to do that, we're going to use your half square triangle unit and a block that is, for my finished block, I cut this 9 inches. So we're going to act just like it's a half square triangle again. So I'm going to flip this over to the back, and I'm going to draw my line. And again, I just use a ballpoint pen, nothing fancy. Line it up corner to corner and get it exact as you can, and then just draw a line. Try and get it nice and dark so y'all can see. So again, this is just like making a half square triangle. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this down over my existing half square triangle block, and I want to make it so that my new line is going perpendicular to my old seam. And I'm just going to line up the corner so that the corners of my new top block are right along the seam of the bottom block. And now I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch on each side of that line, and I'll get new blocks out of it, 2 new blocks out of it. Okay, I'm ready to sew. This is my 1/4 inch foot, so I'm going to get a very, very accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to run the little 1/4 inch marking so that it is on that line, and my stitching line is going to be exactly 1/4 inch to the side of it. now I'm going to take it out and do the exact same thing on the other side of that line. And again, 1/4 inch on the other side of my marked line. Okay, now we'll take it back to the work table. All right, so now we have our blocks and we need to cut them in half. So you can use a pair of scissors, but I like to use my rotary cutter. And it doesn't have to be an exact half right along this middle for this, because we're never going to worry about that seam allowance. So I just ran over to the ironing board and gave this a quick press so that it would look nice here. But basically, this is our finished block. We have a 1/2 square triangle on this side of the block and 2 1/4 square triangles on this side of the block. And the way we constructed it means that what we have now is a straight of grain all along the outside edges of the block. So the straight grain on your 1/4 square blocks, your 1/4 square triangles, is on the hypotenuse, the longest side, and on your 1/2 square triangle, it's the 2 shorter sides of the triangle. Having the straight grain all around the edges is what gives you a nice, stable, finished quilt, so it doesn't go all wobbly as you're putting it together, because the bias, the not straight grain, can get really, really stretchy, and it's very easy to stretch it out of shape. One other quick thing that I want to mention, right now this block is a little bit more than 8.5 inches square. I like to give myself a little bit of a cushion. You'll see some other tutorials that cut it much finer, but I like to give myself a little bit of room. So just like with the 1/2 square triangle blocks, you're going to need to trim it down a little bit. This is a block that's going to finish. In the finished quilt, the block will be 8 inches across. So we need to trim it right now to 8.5 inches. That's going to give us a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on all sides. So you're going to do the same exact technique as the 1/2 square triangle block, so I'm not going to show it here. But you're just going to square everything up and shave just a little bit off the edges so it gets to 8.5 inches square, and then you can join all your blocks together. So that's it. If you know how to make a 1/2 square triangle block, you can totally make a 1/4 square triangle block, because really all it is doing another 1/2 square triangle unit out of your 1/2 square triangle blocks. The main thing to remember is that with a 1/2 square triangle block, you're going to add 1 inch to your finished block size when you cut your starter squares. For a 1/4 square triangle block, you need to add 1.5 inches, and that's going to give you just a little bit of extra room so that you can trim it down square and get it exactly the right size when you're done. I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World. I'll see you next time.